Okay, so I just wanted to take you through this blueprint because this is the one that we didn't have set up before. Let's go through it left to right. It's the event hit input event. See, most of you probably got this. And what we're going to do is we're going to say if it's not our actor that we've hit, so the other is the other actor that's been hit by the projectile. This is the tiny shooter projectile BP class. So if we haven't hit ourselves essentially, then we check to see if the other actor is actually, this is valid call, just basically checks to see if it's not like pending kill and stuff. So it's useful to do an is valid call on things just to make sure they're weirdly enough valid. And it says, okay, so if it is valid, we cast to, if it's not valid, we'll just destroy ourselves anyway, because we've hit something. It's probably maybe not quite right, but whatever. If it is valid, so if the thing that we've hit is valid, we try and cast it to a pawn. If the cast fails, then we see if it's actually got the mobility of static, and if it has, or rather if it hasn't, we just keep on passing through and spawn an emitter. If it has, then we come to the spawn emitter at location and then destroy ourselves. So basically, if it hits a wall, spawn emitter, destroy. If it hits a pawn, apply damage to the pawn, spawn emitter and destroy. If it hits anything else, spawn emitter and keep going. So that's really what this is doing. I just have some extra stuff here, but we can just get rid of it really. Let's do that now. So simple enough blueprint. You can actually just take this other thing and apply damage to it if you want. I mean, you know, the spawn emitter and destroy. Maybe we want to play a sound and things like that, or maybe we have the actor that destroys itself play a sound. So, but that's the shooter projectile blueprint. So just make sure you've got that one in your blueprint, and that should be it. So I want to just show you the output of what we're going to do in the next few task sheets and stuff, just so you can get a sort of clearer picture. Now there will be some noise here, so maybe you want to just check and make sure. I won't run it for too long. So what's actually going on is that we're spawning our enemies who can now fire, obviously, and we're going to spawn them onto these splines. So one thing I will say about the spline part, because this is something that you won't get from the task sheets, is the spline is essentially just an empty actor dragged into the scene, and then we add a spline component onto it with that component here, and then just drag out in the editor a spline path. It's pretty easy to do. There's plenty of tutorials on doing spline editing, so I'm not going to cover that in these sessions. But just make sure you've got a few, because some of the code that we're going to do in the task sheets actually has methods of finding all of these splines and using them in the spawn functions. So that's it really. There's a bunch of classes to add now. So we're going to make a spline following component, target tracking component. We're going to update a AI controller a few. Some game mode changes. What else is there? Most of it's just that. So let's get on with it. I'll just end this video here and we'll do some task sheets. And no sooner do I start Sorry, stop recording. Then I remember that I've got something else to talk about as well. So there's a couple of blueprints to make. So we've already got the game mode blueprint and the enemy BP. What we also need is an enemy projectile, which is essentially the same thing as the shooter projectile, but with a slightly different setup. So just have a look at this one. It's got the sphere static mesh for collision, but we set the visibility on it to invisible so it doesn't render. And the actual render mesh, we're going to use a little copy of our spaceship, but scaled down a bit, just because, you know. And then it's got a point light on it so we can light up the environment a little bit, and a particle system that's just emitting a smoke trail for the ship. So it's essentially exactly the same. You can actually use the shoot projectile if you want. It doesn't really make any difference. It's just that I wanted something different for these guys to fire. So these guys fire a slightly different thing. If we look on the enemy, on the weapon, it fires an enemy projectile BP here. So you could literally select the old any of them essentially. But I've made one and it's got this fire sound and stuff. So here's the other thing that you probably want to know about. We'll talk about the components in the actual task sheets, but here's the setup for the enemy BP now. So you've got your traditional mesh. Now what I've added is another component that's a child of that mesh. Essentially this is the start of a turret. So there's a tracking component, a target tracking component that takes, will fill it in with an actor pointer into a current enemy variable, and that will then point towards it wherever it is. And then I've added a triggerable weapon on relative to that, and forward a bit along the x-axis, which means that as this thing turns, just this thing's a child of it, it'll go around with it. So basically this is, think of it as the turret of a tank, the target tracking thing. If we added a mesh onto it, it could actually be a turret. Triggerable weapon works as it did before, and trigger works as it did before, kind of, but we're using some AI to set the trigger off. So essentially the AI will make all of this stuff work. And the other thing is that we need to be able to, I'll show you where you set the AI. Once we do an AI controller, so go back to this guy, this blueprint is essentially just an AI controller derived from our tiny AI controller that we created at the start, and we'll do some code obviously in the task sheets. It adds an AI perception component, and one thing you want to do is you want to add a sense for, in this case, sight, and there's the values for it. So the area perception component is the thing that actually allows us to detect who to fire at, essentially. So going back to the viewpoint, there's nothing in the viewport, all it is just the AI controller, and you set which controller to use in this pawn section of the enemy BP, or any actor class essentially. Any pawn class will have what is the AI controller to use when I create one of these pawns. By default we're going to set up enemy AI controller BP, and that's the thing that's going to use the enemy AI controller. Well, we'll go through some of this in class. One thing to note actually while we're here is that we want the transform, we want the transform here, so the AI controller must have this attached to pawn ticked on. And that's because we want this controller, which is an actor class that kind of sits in control of another one, to actually be in the same position as the thing it's controlling, which is this ship. So we want it attached to the pawn rather than like being separate from it, which is kind of a weird idea anyway. But so just make sure you have that tick box on the controller, and we have an air perception with a sight sense on it, and then when you run it, you press the little thingy key. What is that key? The little grave key kind of thing. You can actually see how perception stuff works. It's currently perceiving me as a camera as well, which is kind of weird, but there you go. So the ships are perceiving my current player ship and shooting at it, which is what we want. So there you go. Right, now on with the test sheets.